land of the long white cloud.
Here is New Zealand. Here's New Zealand.
Aotearoa, the name the Maoris gave New Zealand as they drew near its mythical shores 1,000 years ago. Those old adventurers came in canoes thrusting into the unknown, braving storms, sailing southward and still further southward, till after months of endless sea and empty sky, they saw a long white cloud lying on the horizon. The long white cloud that resolved itself into New Zealand, the long looked for unknown land. But times have changed, and today the traveller comes by sea or air along well-charted routes to find a civilized community that counts itself among the nations of the modern world. It's only a little over a century since the first English settlers came to these remote islands in the Pacific and began to lay the foundations of the New Zealand of today. The poetic cloud shape that made the old Maori navigators shout with joy has changed into cities, farms, modern buildings, transport services, and the civilized pattern of living of a young and virile nation. New Zealand today has a population of over 1.75 million. The land is fertile, the people are prosperous, and the future is before them.
Auckland, with its 250,000 inhabitants, is the largest city in the Dominion, a commercial and industrial centre and a busy port from which millions of tons of foodstuffs are shipped every year to Great Britain and other countries. During the past 10 years, the government has undertaken great housing schemes throughout the Dominion. There's nothing shoddy about these houses. They're built to last, and plenty of room has been left for young New Zealand to enjoy fresh air and sunshine and healthy exercise. These, perhaps, are future all-black footballers. There is no need to say, of course, that rugby football is the national game. New Zealand has a temperate climate, and nearly every house has its garden. Big homes, small homes. It's the same everywhere you go, from one end of the country to the other. If you come in summer, you'll see roses like these blooming in suburban gardens. At all seasons of the year, you'll find flowers round the homes of New Zealanders, and vegetables too, but there's nothing to outshine the roses of summertime. High above these tropical canna lilies rises the tower of the Auckland University College. Not far away, the War Memorial Museum gives dignity to the skyline, as do many of Auckland's fine churches. The harbour and the Gulf beyond are one of the world's yachting grounds. In the summertime, over 2,000 yachts and launches move through the blue waters of the Waitemata. If it comes up rough and you don't like white horses, there are the other colours. New Zealanders are just as fond of horse racing as anybody else, and perhaps a little fonder. The big race meetings are among the most brilliant sporting and social events of the year. Totalisator betting is very popular with the crowd. During the last 10 minutes before each race, the excitement and the bustle rise to a climax. Those who've placed their bets take things easy before the excitement begins all over again. Then there's the rush to see the race run, to follow the horses as they come round from the back of the course. Jockeys' colours have become confused. Horses have been obscured, one or two have fallen. But now everything begins to grow clearer as they come round the corner for the last time and move up into the straight. Here they are, thundering along the level turf. The pressure's on. Crowd are expectant, anxious. The leaders are beginning to show up. Here they come, right along in front of the stand. Certainty is beginning to grow. This is the Great Northern Steeplechase, one of the big events in the life of the Auckland racegoer. They're fighting for it. The leaders are going all out. There they go past the finish. Well, I suppose some of the punters were lucky. The hot sunshine delights holiday crowds, but it also forms the chief stock in trade of one of the growing industries of the North Island. Within a few miles of Auckland, thousands of acres of grapes have been developed, and a rich wine industry has sprung up during the past few decades. Of course, some people like them just as they come from the vine, deep purple with the bloom on them and full of the goodness of the sun. This Maori boy is eating sunshine. He belongs to one of the proudest races on earth, and stands on an equal footing with his Pākehā or white schoolmates. The signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840 sealed a covenant between the Māori and Pākehā races.
In consideration thereof, Her Majesty the Queen of England extends to the natives of New Zealand her royal protection and imparts to them all the rights and privileges of British subjects. Nō reira kia mautunu te rongopai me te marie.
And that means, and may peace last forever between Maori and Pākehā.
The Treaty House at Waitangi was built by the first resident magistrate, James Busby, soon after he arrived from England in 1833. The historic Treaty of Waitangi was signed just in front of this building. In 1933, the Treaty House was bought by the then Governor-General, Lord Bledisloe, and presented to the people of New Zealand, Māori and Pākehā. These scarlet hibiscus flowers make us think of Hawaii and other Pacific islands, and that is very fitting, because it was from those faraway islands that the Maoris came to New Zealand. It was here, in this very place, where they grow so prolifically, that the Maori people became united with the Pākehā people of the British race. In the Bay of Islands, there are many historic memories for both races. Here in the far north, the New Zealand of today had its beginning.
In these days, the Bay of Islands has become famous as one of the world's best deep-sea fishing grounds. If we take the coast road north for 30 miles, we come to another beautiful harbour, Rotorua, where the fishing is good too. Swordfish and mako sharks weighing hundreds of pounds are caught in the waters off this coast, and sportsmen come from all over the world to fish for them. One of the nice things about fishing is that it's usually done in pleasant surroundings, and the Rotorua harbour provides a perfect background for the summer fishing holiday. Many a huge fish has been brought in by launch from the deep waters outside the harbour and hung up proudly on the jetty. The Maori people call the east coast the woman coast, and the west coast they call the man coast, and that should tell you the difference. Here over on the man coast is the Hokianga harbour. Away out on the bar there are huge rollers crashing in, and on the long beaches and the gaunt headlands the Tasman Ocean thunders unceasingly. The traveller feels he must stop and look, and if he comes at evening he will see the sunset sky throwing its reflections on the broad reaches of the Hokianga, one of the wildest and loveliest places in New Zealand. Dairy farming is one of the biggest industries in the North Island, and when the farmer has sent his cream to the dairy factory, he has lots of skim milk available for pig farming. New Zealand produces 750,000 of these glamorous creatures every year, and the greater number of them are given a sea trip to Britain and other countries to feed hungry people. All right, girls and boys, don't rush it. You'll catch the ship all right. These are a little further along the road to breakfast, and they'll grow up just to look like the old folks. This solid character is going to make lots of fine breakfasts. There's some lovely scenery here, but it's sights like this that are so satisfying. When we'd seen something of the north, we went back to Auckland and then set off for Rotorua, the famous inland holiday ground. We crossed the broad Waikato River at Hamilton, which is the centre of the biggest dairy farming district in the Dominion, and went on through Cambridge. And that was something very different from the north. Just a little piece of England lifted up and planted down here in the southern hemisphere. Sentiment is one thing, however, and stern practicality is another. Karapiro, with its artificial lake, is only one of the big hydroelectric power stations built by a later generation of New Zealanders. On we went through broad farmlands, across rolling plains, and through the Mamaku Gorge, and came at last to Rotorua. There may be some things that simply aren't done, but there are some places that simply are done, and Rotorua is one of them. We took a quiet stroll through the gardens and watched them playing croquet, and then of course we couldn't resist swimming in the celebrated blue bath, with its warm mineral water brought up out of the depths of the earth. If we'd been suffering from rheumatism, we'd have investigated the bathhouse with its hot mud baths and other treatments, but we were feeling pretty fit after a spell in the north, so we went out to the golf links. We'd been told a lot about them before we ever got to Rotorua. There's something about this Rotorua course that makes them come back year after year, a strange beauty and a sort of topographical charm that casts a spell on the most hardened golfer, and that's saying a good deal. Quite close to the links at Wakarewarewa, or Waka as they call it for short, we saw a real Maori pa. A pa, it's spelled P-A, is a sort of combined village and fort. Notice how the Maori people greet each other when they meet by pressing noses. This greeting is called the hongi. Of course, they don't live in this fashion nowadays, but at Rotorua they keep this model pa. And they're always glad to show the visitors how things used to be done and to demonstrate their traditional games and crafts. This stick game is harder than it looks. And by the way, this and several other old Maori games have been adopted by the physical education teachers in modern New Zealand schools as a training in rhythm and the skillful use of hand and eye. Some of the things we saw at Rotorua impressed us. If we're to judge races by their skill and craftsmanship, by their arts and crafts, and the way they handle materials, then the Maori race is indeed a cultured one. These girls do many things with flax and raupo grass, and just now they're making baskets out of flax. The green part of the flax is scraped away with a mussel shell, and then the fibrous part is woven skillfully into shape. These baskets are used to put food in, and food is cooked in them too. Here at Rotorua, where they have plenty of free cooking facilities in the way of boiling pools, the baskets of food are filled and suspended in a pool. You're perhaps wondering whether the food is tainted by the fumes of sulphur. The answer is no, not the slightest bit. Here they're making pois. They make these little balls out of raupo grass and tie them on the end of a string, and then they twirl them to the rhythm of their song. The most elaborate poi was the canoe poi, where girls give a representation in terms of art of the original war canoes of the first migration to New Zealand. The famous guide Rangi has met many of the great ones of the earth in her time and has shown thousands of visitors round Rotorua. There's something a bit frightening about the hot pools and fumaroles of Rotorua when you meet them for the first time, but you'll get used to them. You'll find boiling pools sometimes right beside cold running water in which trout swim. This is the world's most efficient kitchen, with every age-old convenience for the chef. And close by you'll find lukewarm pools where the Maori boys swim. That lad on the left hasn't got mumps. His mouth's full of pennies. Visitors throw them and the boys dive for them. This kind of thing makes you feel a bit uncomfortable at first, but it's fascinating. They call this mud pool the Rose and the Lily. There are plenty of others that make different patterns, some white or grey, others pink. Wood carving is one of the arts the Maori people brought to a state of perfection unsurpassed anywhere else in the world. Buildings, canoes, weapons and implements were elaborately carved, and the patterns all had a particular significance. Motifs of the same kind were used in the tattooing of the faces of those of high birth. Dignity and pride of race and the memory of a great past are stamped on the faces of many of the old Maoris. In the days before the white man came, they were a fierce, spirited people, brave and generous, and their warmth of humanity, their courage and their great communal spirit are still active today in the honourable partnership of Maori and Pākehā. The memorials of their past are admired and cherished by white New Zealanders who take pride in showing them to the visitors, almost as if they were their own. This is the Pupakura Geyser, which has played for as long as the Maori can remember. There's a cold trout pool right beside it, by the way. You can wander around for days looking at the geysers and boiling pools of Rotorua and wondering how the crust of the earth can be so thin at this point without something awful happening. But you won't find a more splendid sight than Hohutu Geyser. When Hohutu plays, one can almost imagine that the sun stands still in the heavens to watch these great plumes scattering on the breeze.
After spending a day looking at steaming rocks and frantic mud, you may feel that peace is something unknown here until you go out to the trout springs. Here, the demon who rules over the thermal regions has resigned his office. It must be some gentle dryad who watches over this place, where day-long, year-long, the trout move through the green half-light of the pool, weaving endless patterns in the silence. The water looks about 18 inches deep, but actually it's about 10 feet. It's so crystal clear that it creates the illusion of shallowness. What a strange world this is, to live always in the green twilight. Do you remember that poem of Rupert Brooke's about the fish? In a cool, curving world he lies and ripples with dark ecstasies. That big fellow's supposed to weigh over 20 pounds, by the way. After we'd seen Rotorua, they took us out to another weird place, the Tikateri Valley. Not the sort of place to go to if you've got a bad conscience. They call it Hell's Gate. But why only the gate? Looks like the centre of things. One of our last impressions of Rotorua was the quiet-mannered shyness of her Maori people. This girl, a descendant of the famous chief Honahiki, although dressed up in the finery of her ancestors to show us how they used to look, was actually a fully qualified nurse in a modern hospital. In the evening, we took a stroll down to the edge of Lake Rotorua to see Mokoia Island and the fading light of the sunset. Very lovely, very calm, after all the brimstone and sulphur of Tikateri. Next day, we packed our gear in the car and set out again. We travelled along the road they call Hongi's Track, after one of the most famous of the Maori warriors. This motor road was originally the track Hongi hacked through the virgin bush to transport his 90-foot war canoe overland to surprise an enemy expecting him by water. By the roadside is the wishing tree of Chieftainess Hinehopu, a tree famous in recounted legend as having saved her life. And now you must propitiate her as you pass by laying down a fern leaf, or rain and storms will follow you, and at the same time you can make a wish. So let this be my wish, that many people who've never set foot in New Zealand may be able to visit the Dominion and see the mountains and the lakes and the great forests in reality. Southward again, down and across the Bay of Plenty and through the Wairika Gorge southward to Gisborne. This prosperous town is the hub of the great farming district, known oddly enough as Poverty Bay. That was the name Captain Cook gave it. But it has an ironical sound today. No place ever belied its name so much as Poverty Bay. For through this port of Gisborne, millions of tons of beef, mutton and wool have been sent overseas, and production is still rising. Gisborne is a spacious town with broad streets, and because its life is built on farm production, its prosperity is firmly established in the world of today. Like all New Zealand towns, Gisborne has its flower gardens and public reserves. Apart from being a busy port, it's a favourite holiday place. All along this east coast there are magnificent surf beaches, and Gisborne is one of the places where the swimmer finds himself right in his element. New Zealanders are all keen swimmers, and in coastal districts children live in the water, as they say. And even inland, swimming is part of the school curriculum. And the trouble is to keep the pupils out of the baths. If you're tough, you do it this way, of course. New Zealanders can play hard, and they can work hard, too. With a hungry world waiting for supplies of foodstuffs, New Zealand farmers are doing their best to increase the yield from the fertile lands of the Dominion. The beef industry is one of the most important branches of farming. 750,000 cattle are killed every year, and 2/3 of them are exported to Britain. It's a great life, and you know you're doing a useful job. Just look at them. We're not in Texas. This is New Zealand. Of course, the farmers aren't the only people in the beef industry. The preparation of beef carcasses is a job for experts. A very highly skilled business indeed. Food, food, and still more food. That's the cry today in a world where hunger stands on millions of doorsteps. Food and warmth. And for warmth, we need wool. Here on the east coast of New Zealand, the emphasis is on sheep. Tens of thousands of sheep are shorn every year. Bales and bales of wool are dispatched to be used locally or sent across the sea to colder lands. There are some very big sheep stations in the Poverty Bay district, and there are plenty of smaller ones too, where simple farmsteads set in pleasant natural surroundings beside a river or on the edge of a patch of bush provide homes for the settlers. It's not all beer and skittles, this business of sheep farming, but it has its compensations. They live close to the land, these people, and that means health of body and mind. Since the dawn of history, farming has been the basic industry of society, without which civilization could never have happened, and its vital importance has been impressed upon us very deeply. New Zealand is a farming country, first and foremost, and New Zealanders are proud of the way in which their great primary industries have been built up over the years. Our grandfathers could hardly have believed that such a huge expansion was possible. But by hard work and the application of scientific knowledge, the thing has been done. There's something like 30 million sheep in New Zealand, and her wool, mutton, and fat lamb are eagerly sought after. Warmth. Deep, soft warmth. To be made into clothes for somebody. It's not going to stay where it is for long. How'd you like it? Just a bit of a trim-up? Oh, I think we better have the whole lot off. Make a clean sweep of it. The summer's here, and after you get outside, you'll feel the benefit. After you get used to it. It doesn't take long to shear a sheep, if you know how. And this man's an expert. He takes the wool off in great swathes. Look at it. Solid wealth. Coming off the back of a sheep. Wool. One of the foundations of New Zealand's prosperity. The Greeks had a name for it. They called it the quest of the golden fleece. It takes a good many of these to make up a bale of wool, of course. They're packed down tightly in wool presses under heavy pressure, and then the bales are loaded and sent away to the wool stores. Eventually they'll be sold and find their way into the hands of the manufacturers to be made into clothing, blankets, materials, and the finest traveling rugs in the world. Wool is a 4-letter word meaning comfort.
After seeing Gisborne, we pushed on further down the east coast, sometimes passing drovers with their flocks of sheep, and came to Napier, another big farming centre and port, and a popular winter health resort. But it isn't only in the winter that Napier opens its arms to the visitor. The Esplanade stretches for nearly 2 miles, and great waves come rolling in from the Pacific. And in the summertime, Napier is a gay place, surf bathing, roller skating, sunbathing. Yes, they know how to have fun in Napier. The seaside swimming pool has its attractions too. Beautiful. Lovely to do and lovely to watch. The long seafront of Napier is laid out with gardens and lawns on the very brink of the Pacific Ocean. Napier lies in the southern corner of Hawke's Bay, and if you follow the bay southward a short distance, you come to Cape Kidnappers, where the sea swirls among the rocks and the wind blows free, and the seabirds wheel and cry above, and send their shadows flitting across the sand. This great white rock is the home of the gannets, the only gannet sanctuary in the world that is on the mainland. Here is the empire of the gannets. When man intrudes, they treat him with disdain, unless he becomes too familiar, in which case he gets a peck in the legs. This looks like a little domestic argument. All right, don't nag at me. They wheel against the blue of the sky and the ocean, moving in great sweeping curves. Here is life stripped to the bone, simplified down to nothing but rock and wind and sea and fish. Fish that are brought up out of the sea by the birds, diving into the blue waves. Yet here in this extremity of bleakness, they breed and nurture their young, hatching, feeding, coddling them, protecting them from the wild elements.
Those are Government Railways Department buses going over to Taupo.
Taupo, where they do all the fishing? Well, let's go. Wild horses can't stop me from going to Taupo. Well, look at that, will you?
Now, Taupo simply mustn't be missed. Taupo, that great inland lake where fishermen gather from all parts of the globe. And so, after we'd seen the east coast, away we went across some magnificent country. And sure enough, we met some wild horses. Not one of these has ever felt a bit in his teeth. Now, come on, line up. We'll take a snap of you. Come on. Yeah, that's better. That's the way. Now look at the camera. Good. We'll post you the proofs.
With memories of the seacoast fresh in our minds, the calm beauty of lake water was like soft music after the crashing chords of a symphony. Blue water and poplars shedding their gold at the water's edge. In New Zealand you get used to the grandeur of the evergreen bush, but here and there you see English trees standing out vividly against the background of the native landscape, as here beside the Hooker Falls. All through this countryside, as in many parts of New Zealand, there are rivers flowing down from the hills to the sea. And in most of these rivers there are trout. You've heard about salmon leaping the rapids. The New Zealand trout also battles its way up to the mountain shallows. In just a moment or two, you'll see a waterfall. And if you watch carefully, you'll see the trout leaping up the fall in the Aratiatia Rapids, believe it or not. Be ready now. Now, here we are. You'll see the trout leaping in just 1 second. There, did you see that? Now, here's another one. There, did you see it? You'd see quite a few of them if you stayed here for long. They move up through all this tremendous, boisterous water. There's no stopping them. All the rivers and streams flowing into Lake Taupo have trout in them. But the best and most famous of them all is the Tongariro River. Fly fishing isn't only a sport. Isaac Walton made the world aware of that a very long time ago. It's a delicate art as well. And when the fight is over, it's satisfying to hold a nice, big, shiny trout in your hands. And when the sun goes down at the end of a splendid day, it's good to see a sight like this. Yes, a little gloating is permissible. On the road again, we drove round the shores of Lake Taupo and out across to the Chateau Tongariro, with Ruafehu, 9,000 feet high, towering in the background. There's plenty to do here. Skiing, well, of course. And even if you're not an expert, you can have a lot of fun. If you want to get away from it all, something to brush the cobwebs away, then skiing may be the answer. But you mustn't be prepared to stand on your dignity. You may be lucky if you can stand on anything at all, even your own 2 feet. Still, there's nothing like trying. Skiing can sometimes be classed as a sedentary occupation. There are some fine big snowfields in this part of the country. It's a fascinating place, this national park, with its 3 big mountains, Ruapehu, Tongariro, and Narahoi. The Maori legend says that this giant, Mount Egmont, used to stand near Ruapehu and Narahoi. There was a little bit of bother, so they say, the eternal triangle, of course, so Egmont stalked away. Standing 80 miles to the west of National Park, it rises from the flat dairying country of Taranaki, only 12 miles from the sea. This is one of the richest dairying districts in the world, and here we see horses pulling a konaki, or farm sledge, across the paddocks. Manure is taken out, hay is carted, and other farm chores are done with this vehicle. There are over 4.5 million cattle in New Zealand, and about a third of them are dairy cattle. The dairy industry is on the high road of prosperity, with government-guaranteed prices and bulk marketing of produce. Good morning, Pansy. Don't be afraid, the camera won't snap you. Thousands of New Zealand families find happiness and security and hard work and good health farming here. Dairy farming in these days is a science, and since it's no use living in a farming country if you don't make the most of it, a free milk service for all school children has been introduced by the government in recent years, and this scheme guarantees that every child shall have its proper supply. Vast quantities of butter and cheese are produced here in Taranaki. Boxes of butter bearing the brand of the silver fern find their way to markets throughout the world.
From Taranaki we went north to see one of the most remarkable places in New Zealand, the celebrated Waitomo Caves. At all the important holiday resorts there are comfortable hotels or hostels, and Waitomo is no exception. There's first-class accommodation to be had at the guest house right by the caves. These caves are something quite unique even in New Zealand, where nature has been so lavish with beauty and strangeness. There are delicate fairy-like grottos, galleries with sparkling walls, fantastic arches and Gothic pinnacles. The huge vaults of Waitomo are hung with glistening stalactites, as many other caves are in other parts of the world. But at Waitomo is one cave, which the camera can't show you, which is really unique. A huge, silent cavern glowing with the unbelievable eerie radiance of a myriad glowworms. Visitors drift quietly in their boat under an arch of light and gaze up at something they just don't believe, even while they look. It's a strange, uncanny world, this in the cave, a sort of place we might come across in one of the tales of the Arabian Nights. The world of getting and spending, of business and politics, all the bustle and confusion of life. It all seems very remote in this eerie, underground kingdom, away from the blue sky and broad sunlight. And now from this dream world we go south to the solid reality of a modern city, Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand. It stands at the southernmost end of the North Island, on a great sweep of harbour surrounded by hills. This is the nerve centre of New Zealand's life, the place where laws are enacted and government is administered. Apart from being the seat of government, Wellington is also a great commercial and industrial centre. Here in Parliament buildings, the nation's business is done, and because New Zealand is a democracy, this is the most important place in the Dominion, taking its traditions from the Mother of Parliaments in Westminster, and standing as the bulwark of democratic freedom. In the open ground in front of Parliament buildings stands the Cenotaph. In the foreground is the statue of Richard John Seddon, the great Liberal statesman of half a century ago. Wellington has grown rapidly during the past few decades and has attained to a full metropolitan dignity, with many modern buildings, including some of the finest hotels in Australasia. The very best in luxury accommodation can be had here, in hotels that are praised by visitors from Europe and America. The Dominion Museum building stands on high ground in the middle of the city. It contains many art treasures and some rare and extensive collections. This huge block of flats is evidence of the progressive building policy followed by the Government Housing Department in recent years. We're standing on one of the hills that enfold Wellington. There are magnificent views all along these hills. This city is still growing, thrusting out into the Hutt Valley to the east, developing new industries, putting up new buildings. Its deepwater harbour is one of the finest assets any city could hope to possess. 50 miles away, tucked inside the lovely Milford Sound, lies the little town of Picton. The traveller takes the ferry express and leaves Wellington Harbour to make the journey across Cook Strait, saying farewell to the North Island and taking with him a crown of fresh and vivid memories of the things he has seen. He is about to make his first acquaintance with the South Island, and there he will find himself in a different country, one that becomes more different from the North Island the further south he goes. Thousands of people come here holidaying to the Milford Sounds, where land and water are interwoven. Great hills rise out of the soft arms of the sea. At Picton, they make the most of the gifts of nature, spending lazy days in the sun, enjoying the calm and sheltered waters or cruising in their launches. New Zealanders and visitors gather beside the water in the hot sunshine and swim and sunbathe in these quiet inlets where the bush comes down to the water and songbirds sing on the beaches. From Picton we go to Nelson, one of the most attractive towns in the Dominion. It stands at the apex of the great V-shaped gulf known as Tasman Bay, a sheltered spot chosen a century ago as one of the settlements of the famous New Zealand Company, established by Edward Gibbon Wakefield. No lovelier site could have been chosen. The coastline all around this northern end of the South Island is fabulously beautiful. And Nelson's favourite watering place in the summertime is Tahuna Beach, a strip of sand only 3 miles from the township, where the beach slopes gently and the children romp safely all day. You could hardly imagine Nelson without gardens, both public and private, and the Queen's Gardens, which are close to the business quarter, provide a pleasant interlude for the visitor who takes a stroll. Swans sail through the reflection of trees, breaking the still surface of the water into a pattern of ripples. Nelson people are proud of their colleges. Here we see the boys' school. Nelson College is one of the best known in the Dominion. It's turned out some good men, too. Rutherford House. We live in the age of atom now, for better or for worse, and this Nelson old boy has a good claim to be called the father of the atomic age. Very proud of Lord Rutherford, and they've named one of their schoolhouses after him. His career in the strange and new world of modern physics was as spectacular as that of any scientist of his time, and this portrait hangs in the college as an inspiration to later generations of Nelson lads. There are many fine old buildings in the Nelson district built in days when the English tradition was fresh in the minds of the colonists. Days that were less strenuous than these, when they took time to lay the foundations of New Zealand well and truly. Libraries, churches, public buildings, dwelling houses, and these helped to provide a solid background for the life of today. These old colonial houses are as sound as a bell, and they have a particular charm about them which is enhanced by the beauty of their setting. Trees and gardens that have grown round them with the passing of the years. Plants and trees of all kinds thrive in the mild Nelson climate. Day is a riot of colour and evening is full of scents drifting on the gentle air. with the magnolia bloom, queen of the night, presiding over the Parliament of Flowers. There are many retired people here, for nature is kind and the sun warms the cockles of the heart. The Nelson district is the California of New Zealand. In every valley the sun draws the season on, pouring down vital warmth, building up life and energy in the soil and in all living things.
Far away on the horizon are the blue hills that bound this fertile district, and on the valley slopes are acres upon acres of fruit trees, apples, peaches, nectarines, pears. At one time, gold was the lure that drew men to this coast, but now it's a different sort of gold they look for in Nelson. The gold of the sun which ripens their fruit, their tobacco, their hops. Nelson has a nearly perfect climate, with more hours of sunshine than any other place in New Zealand. Even in winter, the average is 5.5 hours of sunshine daily. Peaches with the blooms still fresh upon them are picked and put into boxes. I don't know how the growers can bear to part with them, but I suppose they get used to sending these wonderful-looking things away. Nelson apples are famous all over New Zealand, and many of them find their way to Britain too. If there are apples around, you can be sure that boys aren't far away. I hope they came by them honestly. What apples the boys don't eat are packed and sent off to market, where they're always in demand.
Long blue summer days, pale golden beaches, and the sparkle and glint of waves. Happy days of peace and forgetfulness, when life becomes a dream and time slips through the fingers like sand. These are days to remember in the dreadness of winter, when the wind sighs over the hills and life becomes a burden.
One of Nelson's biggest industries is hop growing, and I don't need to tell you what the hops are for. Hop vines were originally brought to New Zealand from Kent, but nowadays quite a lot of English beer is brewed with hops imported from New Zealand. They look so attractive it seems a shame to pull them down, but down they must come, to be picked over by the girls and put in bins. Hop picking is a seasonal occupation, and workers from other parts of the country flock to Nelson in the summertime. Quite a few of the girls are university students. Hop picking in the sunshine makes a very pleasant holiday and earns some extra money. Well, here's to the girls who made it possible.
I don't mind if I do.
Not so very many years ago, New Zealand used to import all her tobacco leaf. But nowadays there are big plantations in the Dominion, and in Nelson tobacco growing is a virile industry, which turns out a high-grade leaf for the manufacture of pipe and cigarette tobacco. Over 5 million pounds of tobacco are produced in New Zealand every year, and the Nelson soil and climate have been found to be ideal for the growing of the weed. When the leaves are ripe, the job of picking begins. Those leaves at the bottom mature first and are the strongest, so they're taken at the first cropping. It's a strenuous business picking tobacco, very hard on the back. The pickers must be careful not to crush the leaves unduly, as they discolour and lower the grade. When you smoke your pipe at ease and comfort, spare a thought for these fellows slogging away under the brazen summer sun, bending and stooping for hours on end. The leaves are carted away to a central depot and passed over to the girls. Like the hop pickers, these girls are university students improving the shining hour. They take the leaves and string them out on racks for drying. This kind of thing looks fairly simple, but it requires a good deal of dexterity if you're to make any sort of paste. This tobacco growing is a tricky business. Everything has to be done at just the right moment, and that takes good judgment and close watching. Next, the leaves are put in the big kiln and taken a stage further on their journey to the tobacconist's counter. When they come out of this hot shop, they've begun to look like the tobacco leaves in the advertisements. Golden brown leaves carrying with them the promise of peace and contentment. Cool, fragrant smoke curling up from the pipe bowl, feet on the mantelpiece, and worries forgotten. It's sad to think of all that work going up in smoke, but that's just life, I suppose. There are many spectacular gorges in the mountain country, and one of the most remarkable of them is the Buller Gorge. From Nelson, the road runs for 64 miles along the banks of a great river, beside bush-clad mountains that tower above the highway. The Buller River, by the way, is named after the famous naturalist, whose book on the birds of New Zealand is highly prized by collectors today. It's a long trip through the gorge, so the traveller stops to have a cup of tea out of the thermos, or perhaps something a little stronger. And so let his eye take in the scale of this great river valley. At one point on the journey, the road has been hewn out of solid rock, which overhangs the full width of the highway. It's known as Hawk's Crag, this place. A great feat of road making and an indication of the sort of country we're passing through. Through the gorge we went, heading for the west coast, where the wild Tasman beats against a rocky shore. There's hardly a day in the year when a big swell isn't rolling in, bursting on the long beaches, crashing on the rocks and headlands. The day we saw it, it was reasonably calm, but even then there were combers tumbling to shore. One of the first things that struck us was the variety of strange formations. Nature seems to have been in an experimental mood the day she turned the west coast out of her mold. The oddest of all are the pancake rocks, as they're called. There they are, great heaps of them. All we lack now is some maple syrup. Our first glimpse of the southern lakes came as a surprising contrast. Lake Maparika lay there in a crystal dream, dreaming of mountains. Far in the distance and mirrored in the blue serenity is the famous Franz Josef Glacier. A glacier is a river of ice in slow motion. The great valleys of the South Island were carved out in remote ages by glaciers moving down to the sea, and here the process still goes on. The Franz Josef is one of the most remarkable glaciers in the world. From a height of 8,000 feet, it descends in the comparatively short distance of 8.5 miles to an altitude of only 700 feet, and its lower portion lies buried in some of the most luxuriant subtropical vegetation to be seen anywhere in the world. It's been compared to a huge flaming jewel in the mountainside, and when you see it, lit with blue and green and mauve and purple light in every rift, a radiance that is as soft and clear as flame itself, when you see the ethereal glow in its caves and hollows, you'll not feel inclined to disagree with that comparison. The Franz Josef drops so steeply that the whole of its trunk is broken with yawning crevasses and enormous ice falls and giant pinnacles. Within its caverns we see the architecture of this planet at its loveliest. The Franz Josef Glacier, a thing of strange and lovely beauty. Nearby is the Tasman Glacier, which is 18 miles long. Plenty of room on this for walking and climbing. When you climb to the top of a ridge and look out over the huge panorama of ice and snow, you begin to feel something of the vast scale of this landscape, with its great broken masses and its gigantic rubble of rock and ice. When you're tired of battling with mountains, perhaps you'll descend and make your way to Lake Matheson and let your eyes rest on the peaceful reflections of the giants against whom you've been pitting your strength. Mirrored here on the surface of one of New Zealand's loveliest stretches of water, these mountains look gentle and serene. It's hard to imagine the great winds roaring across the ridges, the snowstorms streaming from the topmost peaks. In the distance, the Fox Glacier descends to 670 feet above sea level, the lowest of any glacier in the world outside the polar regions. Here again, the great ice flow moves through an almost tropical richness of color and growth in a valley filled with birds.
The southern lakes vary in their range of color. Some are deep blue, others a lovely cerulean, and Lake Tekapo has its distinctive greenish tint. Looking at it through the fringed branches of pines or fir trees, you can almost imagine yourself on the shores of some lake in Switzerland. The old Mackenzie Kirk stands as a monument to remind us today of those early pioneers who settled on these tussock plains. From the inside of the church, we look out over a scene that quiets and stills the minds of those seeking inspiration and strength in a lovely house of God. Mount Cook, which the Maoris name Rangi, the cloud piercer, towers over 12,000 feet above sea level, the highest and most celebrated peak in New Zealand. Near its foot stands a hermitage where people come from all over the world for the winter sports. There are many other imposing peaks in this region where the great 300-mile chain of the Southern Alps, the spine of the South Island, reaches its highest levels. The Hermitage is a fine, comfortable place to have a complete rest. But of course, skiing is the main thing. If you don't want to relax, if you feel really tough and energetic, then you take the bus up to the skiing ground. Even if you don't want to go skiing, if you'd rather stand by and watch the other fella take a spill, it's still worth going, just for the sake of getting up high and living for a few hours on the roof of the world, with a background of huge snow mountains and glaciers wherever you look, and a feeling of peace in your heart, the sort of peace you only dream about back there in town, with people milling around you and last month's bills not paid. You'll find yourself in the biggest room in the world, with no doors and no windows and no cooking smells.
The day we went to the skiing ground, there was quite a crowd of us. Men and women, some of them expert skiers, and others, well, just like ourselves. We made our headquarters for the day at the Ball Hut, and lost no time getting out to the big slopes. In that crisp mountain air, you don't feel cold, you just feel fit, and about 10 years younger. You're going to be tired before the day is out, and it's going to be good to have a hot bath and a drink, then dinner back at the Hermitage, and later to sleep like a log until morning breaks over the mountain peaks. But just now you feel as if you could walk for miles and climb anything. Everything is so white, a world of blinding light. When you move, you feel it's a sacrilege to put your footprints on the immaculate purity. An immensity of whiteness, except for our long shadows falling on the snow and making caricatures of us. Great walls of whiteness rise around us. It's a stiff climb up, some of these snow slopes, but by the time you've got to the top, your lungs are full of mountain air. There's no thought now in their minds of anything but the thrills to come, the long, sweeping curve downward like the wind, the winding flight down the great snow track, the excitement of speed and rhythm. Somewhere far beyond these gleaming reaches of snow lies the world. There's work to be done, lawns to be cut, gardens to be dug, socks to be darned. But the world and all its worries are forgotten for the moment. Let's watch the fun. A winding track reduces the speed, but adds interest to the run from the skier's point of view. Always in the background, white mountain walls shine on the brink of heaven. Here is the great Tasman Glacier looming above us, making us feel like ants. Away they go, curving down the gentle slope, just limbering up for a bit of tougher work later on. I don't suppose there's a skiing film ever been made without this being done. Sorry, but we just couldn't resist it. It's much more tricky to do than you'd imagine. Makes the cameraman feel like a croquet ball. Now here's a fine big slope. There'll be some long runs on this. Just watch them. There they go, plunging down a breakneck speed. But fortunately, there's no need for any neck breaking. When they make an error of judgment, they fall into the kind arms of the snow, which is always waiting to catch them. It's all in the game. There's a wrong way to fall and a right way. You should learn quickly enough. You'll get plenty of practice at the beginning. It must be the most exciting thing in the world to send yourself hurtling down a slope like this, with the wind rushing past like a gale, and all that whiteness beckoning below you. I wish I'd got that far, but I haven't got past lesson 1. How to stand up without falling flat on my face. Mount Cook isn't the only skiing ground in these parts. Way over at the Skippers near Queenstown, there's first-class skiing to be had. I'm awfully good at this kind of skiing. All you do is hang onto this rope and get yourself pulled up for about 500 feet at a gentle 5 miles an hour. And when you get to the top, you're ready for the run down at a much greater pace. I actually get up faster than I skied down.
Queenstown, on the shores of Lake Wakatipu, is one of the loveliest and most peaceful spots in the country and a favourite health resort. In the background are the Remarkables, a long, jagged range of mountains rising up several thousand feet. The little township nestles under the hills with lake water lapping peacefully at its front door. Wakatipu is one of the biggest lakes in New Zealand. It's 50 miles long and covers an area of 114 square miles, something like 1,400 feet deep. The intense blue of the water is due to its depth and clearness. In late summer, the rowan berries make a brave show in Queenstown, great clusters of them glowing redly against the blue of halcyon skies. The old stone buildings give the township an air of distinction, of beauty and dignity combined. Trips on the lake are very popular with visitors who come to Queenstown. You really need to go on one of these launch excursions to get a proper idea of the wonderful mountain region surrounding this shimmering sheet of water. If it happens to be summertime and you have memories of Queenstown in winter, you'll notice that the Remarkables have lost their white cloak of snow. This Queenstown district gets very little rain during the course of the year, so on almost any day in any season of the year, a launch trip like this will store the mind of the traveler with scenes that will linger for a long time. From the lower levels and the great bluffs of the shoreline, the eye moves up the distant snow mountains that rise on all sides, peak after peak, range upon range stretching in rugged grandeur for miles, and behind these one knows are other great mountains, and others beyond them again, deep in a region where very few men have trod. Away up the lake there are sheep stations, lonely places whose only links with the world are the steamer and the radio. The steamer does the long trip on Wakatipu. There are well-organized travel services throughout the holiday grounds of New Zealand for day trips as well as longer journeys. Wherever you go in Lakeland, beauty and wonder walk side by side. There are mountains and valleys, rivers that tumble gaily over their rocky beds, and forest glades that lift a beckoning finger to the passer-by. In New Zealand, the picnic is an institution. There are plenty of quiet corners in the lake region where a day can be spent idling on the grass or strolling through bush pathways. Boiling the billy is a ritual procedure that simply can't be omitted from any picnic outing. To tell you the truth, a cup of tea is something you'll soon get used to in any part of New Zealand. At any hour of the day at all, you'll find yourself involved in some little gathering where tea drinking is the chief business. There are long days in the sun, and there are other days where the great mists roll up over the mountains and give a new sort of splendor to the scene. And nights to be remembered long afterwards, through the mist of the years, nights of burning stars and moon-flecked waters.
From the lakes and the mountains, we moved eastward across the province of Otago and came to its chief city, Dunedin. It's a fine, dignified city, is Dunedin, and its people are proud of their Scottish origin. They like to hear Dunedin called the Edinburgh of the Southern Hemisphere, and they've put up a noble statue to Robert Burns. Dunedin has many stately buildings, and like most New Zealand towns and cities, it has plenty of space between the pavements, and the streets are set off with trees to relieve the severity of stone and concrete. There are some very fine libraries in this city. The old Scottish tradition of learning has been carried on. The harbour is surrounded by hills and is sheltered from the Pacific Ocean by a long, narrow peninsula. The foresight of the early Scottish settlers in setting aside both lands and money for educational and religious purposes, enabled the Otago University to get an early impetus which it has never lost. Dunedin people are especially proud of First Church, which stands in the heart of the city and is a monument to the strength of spirit of its Presbyterian founders. This massive building with its great spire soaring skyward is said to be the finest example of Gothic architecture in the Southern Hemisphere. St. Paul's Anglican Cathedral is another fine church. Here we see a most curious building. It was put up in 1871 for the Honourable W.J.M. Larnock, and it's known to this day as Larnock's Castle. It was copied from an old Scottish building at simply enormous cost. The interior is Gothic in type, and the corbels of the arches and the ceiling of the inner hall are hand-carved. Carvers worked for 18 years on the ceilings and doors. The glass in every window is doubled. The hanging marble staircase is quite unique, and marble was used also for the mantelpieces and for the paving of the entrance hall. The ornateness of this building has to be seen to be believed. The motive that led to its erection must have been a very curious one indeed. From the battlemented tower, a remarkable view of anything up to 100 miles can be obtained on a clear day. Goodbye, Dunedin, we're leaving you, and taking the road to the west again. But this time, it's the southwest, where the great fjords lie. That great region of lakes and mountains and rocky paths and sounds, where the sea stretches its long fingers probing into the land. From the northern end of Lake Piano, the Milford track begins that 32-mile route to Milford Sound that's been called the finest walk in the world. Well, that's a tall claim to make, but nobody who's done this 3-day trip through valley and bush has been heard to challenge it. Huge mountain ranges leap towards the sky. In the depths of the valleys lie rivers and pools of water that mirror the emerald lights, and great rocky ridges stretch on all sides of us, gaunt ribs of rock that form the skeleton of this gigantic landscape. Lake Mintaro lies like a jewel in the midst of this valley, its limpid waters shining softly. Our path lies always in the shadow of the great peaks, the dreaming stillness of a lake or pool, or the lacy shawl of a waterfall. There are streams to be crossed, detours to be made through a leafy wilderness, without a single snake or harmful animal or insect. And our eyes keep turning to those sentinels that stand and watch us as we thrust our way below them, encroaching on their solitude. The track leaves the valley and wanders up between the grim walls of the Clinton Canyon with its great turreted crags. Here we find the mountain daisy and a wealth of other alpine flowers. They're so small and so gentle, these flowers, so unobtrusive, that we shall have to tread carefully to avoid crushing them under our feet. Here grow the gentians, too, found only in such remote and high places as this, and the mountain lily, which is not a lily at all, but the world's largest buttercup, spreads its broad leaves to catch the dew. The traveller can pick one of these leaves and quench his thirst with the crystal water lying within it. On the heights of McKinnon Pass, 3,400 feet up, you climb to the top of some ridge in this lonely kingdom of the snow god. Gaze long, take it into your mind, and store it there. The great valley you have trodden lies open before you, stretching into the remote distance and losing itself in the perspective of mountain ranges. Two-thirds of the way along the track to Milford, the traveller comes upon the Sutherland Falls, tumbling nearly 2,000 feet to the valley floor, one of the highest waterfalls in the world, and one of the loveliest. The path leads onward through a great valley bordered by mountains of rock, and brings us at last to the head of Milford Sound, where the hostel is waiting for us with open arms and with good food and hot baths and comfortable beds. Behind us towers Mount Tutoko, 9,000 feet high.
From the moment we arrived on the shores of Milford Sound, we felt a sense of unreality. The plumes of the toi-toi grass waved against the dancing blue of the water in this fabulous place, whose fame has echoed round the world. The launch was waiting for us, and soon we set out on our journey down the Sound. Not far from the shore, we came in full view of the Bowen Falls. When the rains come, they send a great cloud of spray scattering across the full width of the inlet. Away down at the entrance to the Sound, a mist materialized and lay across the water, obscuring the narrow gateway to the sea. These gigantic battlements of rock climb sheer out of the water for thousands of feet. Milford Sound is over 1,200 feet deep, and the mountains rise to heights of 5,000 and 6,000 feet. New Zealand's fjordland is one of the really ancient parts of the world, a giant landscape carved out of granite, crowned with ice and snow, and Milford Sound is the most wonderful of all the fjords in this region. When these giant grampus ranged alongside and gave us escort, we felt like Ulysses and his comrades sailing the blue Aegean, with dolphins attending the bows of their ship. The golden light of the sun broke across the peaks, and the pale clouds drifted like thoughts across the surface of our dream. Nature has her monuments, and man too builds great monuments to stand against time and death and assert the primacy of the spirit. Far away on the east coast of the South Island lies the city of Christchurch, and in the heart of Christchurch stands the great cathedral whose spire is the symbol of New Zealand's heritage, the heritage of English civilization that was brought to this young land by the early settlers 100 years ago. In this present century, the youth of New Zealand has crossed the seas to fight in two great wars in defense of European civilization. And nowhere else in this country is one so strongly aware of the close link between this Britain of the South and the older land from which its people sprung. In springtime the lilacs bloom, and the chestnut trees light their candles against a leafy curtain. Daffodils burst into yellow flame under the fresh green foliage of English trees on the grassy slopes where the Avon River meanders through the city. people go boating in casual and professional style. Everywhere in this city at this season we are made to think of youth and springtime, and when we look at the economic foundations of the life of these people, we find that the agricultural traditions bound up with England's great past have been transplanted to this new soil. Christchurch is the chief town of Canterbury province, and the life of Canterbury is built on sheep farming and wheat growing. Out in the country districts behind the city, there are men who live close to the land, tilling this fertile earth and harvesting the golden grain. But men cannot live by bread alone. In Canterbury University, as in the colleges of other New Zealand cities, the youth of the nation carries on that tradition of learning, of the pursuit of the things of the spirit, that is the other great pillar of our world. In perpetual strife against circumstances, and in the perpetual rebirth and renewal of all things, both of nature and of the spirit, our lives are lived out on this earth. New Zealand is a young country. Compared with America and Britain and the older European lands, its career in the world can hardly be said to have begun. Those rugged spirits who took their courage in both hands and set out from the motherland have built another Britain in the deep south of the world. New Zealand is at the springtime of her youth. The visitor finds a warm welcome in the hearts of New Zealanders and is soon made to feel at home in a country where a friendly informality and a vigorous lust for life characterizes the people of this young nation. They're naturally proud of their country, and they're eager to show it to others. It's unique, with a standard of living rare in the world today. And into this small southern dominion, smaller than the British Isles or the state of Arizona, is packed variety and surprises, unexpected contrasts, and the beauty highlights of a dozen countries. Wherever he goes, the visitor will find the road lying clear before him, the beckoning road through a lovely land. Here, then, is New Zealand, and the password is that old Maori word, "Here am I." Welcome.